Hola, my name's Alison Endricken and I'm a literary translator from Portuguese into English. And let me say right here and now that my favourite word in Portuguese is not the world famous saudade, beautiful though it is, but orelhudinho, which for the benefit of those who don't speak the language means big-eared little boy or big-eared little man. That's 4 bits of information rolled into one. And there are plenty more where those came from, because that's one of the beauties of the Portuguese language, its ability to pack so much meaning into such a small space. For 17 of the 24 years I lived in Brazil, I had a dog called Patão, so named because of his large paws. Patão is a combination of pata, or paw, with the augmentative ão, Patão. But Patão never grew very big, and so his nickname was Patãozinho, the inho being the diminutive suffix in Portuguese. So, translated, Patãozinho would be something like little big paw, but all in one word. The fact is, Portuguese is a rich and colourful language whose speakers have adapted it to their own purposes wherever they've taken it. It has evolved from a rich reservoir of contributing languages, ranging from its roots in Vulgar Latin with Germanic and Arabic influences, through to the modern-day language of Brazil, which as a result of its colonial history also contains a considerable lexicon of words from African and indigenous South American languages. Brazilian Portuguese diverges considerably from continental Portuguese in many aspects, as I'm sure most of you already know, to the point where one book will usually have separate translations for the Brazilian and Portuguese publishing markets. Now, I've spent the last 20-odd years working in the opposite direction, translating books from Portuguese into English, and these translations are usually published in both North America and the British Commonwealth countries, with a few changes, despite their regional Englishes. In my career, I've tended to prefer translating the work of Brazilian authors due to my familiarity with Brazil. But before you go thinking that that's a rather narrow slice, if you consider all the countries where Portuguese is spoken, I should point out that Brazil is most definitely plural. There are a lot of Portugueses within its borders. With each new book I've translated, I've had to deal with very different facets of Brazil's national language. From the slang and colloquial register of City of God by Paulo Lins, set in a Rio favela, to the more sophisticated turns of phrase in Chico Buarque's Budapest and Spilt Milk, narrated, respectively, by a professional ghostwriter and a decadent aristocrat. I've had to grapple with the gritty prison slang of Drauzio Varela's Lockdown, Estação Carandiru in Portuguese, and Clarice Lispector's strangely disorienting prose in Near to the Wild Heart. I've had to reproduce in English the voice of a 5-year-old boy at the turn of last century in My Sweet Orange Tree by José Mauro de Vasconcelos, and the voices of 5 old men at the hour of their death in The End by Fernando Torres. There has been the challenge of children's books, such as Phasmic Flops by Eva Fornari, and the poetry of Adriano Lisboa in the collection Equator. Each and every one of these works has taught me a little more about the language and just how different it can be in the mouths of its speakers. None, however, have challenged me as much as Grande Sertão Veredas by João Guimarães Rosa. I refer to it in the Portuguese here, as I've yet to settle on a translation of this very iconic title, although it was previously published in 1963 by the New York publisher Alfred Knopf as The Devil to Pay in the Backlands. The fact that I'm retranslating it is proof that I'm certifiably mad and an eternal optimist. Mad because many have said it is untranslatable due to its neologisms, obscure vocabulary, dense wordplay and crooked syntax. An optimist because I refuse to believe that it can't be translated, despite all the difficulties that it presents. I was fortunate enough to receive funding from the Itaú Cultural to work on the translation full-time for 3 years and continue to work on it part-time as I also do a PhD about the translation of Gran Sertão Veredas at the University of Western Australia. Now, Gran Sertão Veredas has taken me both physically and mentally into Brazil's hinterlands, the vast sertão that occupies a large swathe of the states of Minas Gerais, Goiás and Bahia. It has taken me to the place in the world that has, according to linguists, most preserved archaic Portuguese words and still uses them. Gilbaldo, the first-person narrator of the book, is sitting on his veranda talking to an unknown interlocutor, telling him his life story, in particular his days as a jagunço, or hired soldier in the sertão. Gilbaldo wrestles with two great existential problems, or questions: love and a pact with the devil that he isn't sure he's made, which he slowly unravels from the vaults of memory, trying once again to make sense of. The story is mysterious and surprising, but what drives the book like an arrow into readers' hearts is the way the story is told, because Hossa's wordplay is sheer magic. The translation is extremely difficult, with many intersecting issues involved, but since today is World Portuguese Language Day, I will focus on the linguistic matrix of the book. There is an identifiable regiolect, or regional dialect, from the state of Minas Gerais, in which, beyond the usual differences in vocabulary that one can expect to find in Brazil's different states, there is a particular way of using language that appears to be characteristic of those who live there. In the mouths of locals, root words can undergo spur-of-the-minute metamorphoses, wherein a noun can shapeshift into a verb into an adjective, and an adjective into a noun, at the drop of a hat, should the utterance require it, giving rise to an almost endless array of expressive possibilities. And Hossa knew how to take advantage of that, and he did so in his work. This way of using language can seem more or less idiomatic, depending on where a reader hails from in Brazil. So an educated reader from a large urban centre in another state, such as São Paulo or Rio, might find it quite far removed from their own reality and attribute much of the colourful language to the author's imagination. The inhabitants of Minas Gerais, on the other hand, are less inclined to think this way, while people from the deep interior of the state where the story takes place have on several occasions told me quite emphatically, "É assim que a gente fala." That's how we speak. Piers Armstrong has observed that Hossa's style is not, as it might seem, a mere recreation of authentic local speech patterns, but rather a selective pastiche, a subjective appropriation of the same. And Sandra Vasconcelos writes, "For Hossa, the sertão was not the slow-changing face of the country, but a matrix where the re-enchantment of the world was still possible."